Do you know what nemesis means? A righteous infliction of retribution manifested by an appropriate agent. Personified in this case by me.
If you read the Bible, Mark, you'd know that there won't be another 1,000 years. Right now we're in the last days as foretold in the book of Revelation.
The last days? You mean the coming of the apocalypse, right? The rapture.
You only have to look at the signs. There are wars and rumors of wars.
Now, just so the rest of us know how much time is left, when is the rapture supposed to hit? Exactly. Is it midnight New Year's Eve?
That's right.
Now, is that midnight LA time or Eastern Standard Time or what? I mean, what time zone has got in anyway?
I pray for you all.
Happy heresies, my beloved truth seekers. I think you know what's in store for you on this program from our bombastic introduction. Welcome so much to the sanctuary where we gather as a pantheon of gods in the making here at the virtual Alexandria. In cyberspace, no one can hear you scream, but no one can light that stake under your feet while we play in the joyous fairways of blasphemy. Heresy shouldn't be this much fun, I tell you.
Ready your breakfast and eat hearty. But tonight, we dine in hell!
We are the Gnostics, the veterans of 1,000 psychic wars, and the ones who have our third eye open to the masquerade that is reality. We try and stay away from scholarly pontification and avoid New Age babble like the mind-slaying bacteria that it is. I am Abraxas, in his mortal incarnation, broadcasting through the God above God dat cam, somewhere in the rusty machinery that is Chicago. I am your host and psychopomp to the farthest shores of imagination. I am you.
I am God here!
We no longer see through a glass darkly at the suffering imposed by the archons, the authorities, and the powers and principalities. At the same time, we are beginning to sense the divine spark of light that shines brightly in the darkness that knows it not. And we understand that our mission is not only to liberate, awaken our own shard of godliness, but aid those who are ready to take the final journey across what the Valentinians called Horus, border in Greek, into the stillness and rest of the pleroma, the fullness of the divine. We're on a dark odyssey where only a few will taste the ecstatic waters of gnosis and finally feel sated after so many lifetimes of sandy thirst.
Sooner or later you're going to realize, just as I did, there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path.
Like George Orwell once said, speaking the truth in times of universal deceit is a revolutionary act, and we continue our revolution in the name of Hypatia of Alexandria. And today, on this approximately Saturday, August 23rd, the year of our demiurge 2008, and as just mentioned, we fully challenge the whole soap opera of Bible prophecy, apocalypse, and end times that has spanned a whole cottage industry almost at the same instance Christianity came into being.
Why do you taunt me with your darkness? Your evil is stinking up our streets! The end is near! We are all gonna die!
This is our second slice of our Secrets of the Bible series with Tim Callahan, author of Bible Prophecy and Secret Origins of the Bible. In the last go-around, we removed the veils of so many autisms of the canonical Bible until all that was left was a lot of myth and a lot of murder scene tampering of the truth.
Careful, Chief. You dig up the past, all you get is dirty.
Now we will understand the claptrap of where fundamentalists and literalists really want the Bible to end even after you've closed the book. And that is the end of the world and the swelling of their bank accounts.
Well, what if there is no tomorrow? There wasn't one today.
Tim's book, Bible Prophecy, is really an opus on debunking all the Armageddon theology and literature out there that has been going on for centuries. He leaves no eschatological stone unturned. He tackles with impunity all the great scaremongers of our days like Hal Lindsley and Tim LaHaye. He breaks down every single apocalyptical cluster in both the Old and New Testament to divulge what they really mean in their true context. He castrates every specific end-time doctrine, including the Rapture, dispensationalism, and the millennium librettos out there.
Let's all have sex.
And I thought the end of the world couldn't get any worse.
He also negates most of the Old Testament prophecies marking Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, while proving that the rest were literary devices used by the Gospel authors. And, as an added bonus, Tim makes sense of various secular conspiracy theories, like the Illuminati, the New World Order, the Trilateral Commission, and even the symbolism of the evil dollar bill.
Was he working for someone? Yes, he's working for God. So God ordered a hit on an investment bank. There's an awful lot that you don't know.
A good book to carry around when you feel like maybe you're taking crazy pills after fundamentalists start crowing that we are living in the final days because of some new villain appearing on the world stage or some climate disaster occurs on the other side of the world. The Vatican caused Katrina. The Chinese have found the Spear of Destiny. The Russians have armed the Iranians with earthquake and locust missiles. The European Union is in league with the Sith Lords who are secretly under the command of the Dalai Lama. The whore of Babylon is your Aunt Petunia. Blah, blah, blah.
I work for Kaiser Soze.
Let's just be honest. The end-time scenarios are as synthetic as Jennifer Gray's nose after she did Dirty Dancing. It's all platypus done. God did not leave some Ovaltine code in the Bible that only humans, not Satan mind you, could understand and then be whisked away to safety while a Tarantino movie blossoms down on Earth.
Mr. President, I'm not saying we wouldn't get our hair mussed, but I do say no more than 10 to 20 million killed, tops, depending on the breaks.
It's really very demented and the height of human hubris when you think about it. But what are you gonna do? The Orthodox, waiting in the phantasmal concept of faith, desperately need something to prove that their belief system is somewhat authentic. Since they're not that interested in direct experience with the divine, the bloodbath of mankind and plenty of I told you so's will just do fine.
We keep heaven packed with fresh souls.
Furthermore, when you can whittle existence down into a simple battle of good and evil, and you've already bribed the referees, then the mundane life just becomes more bearable. Kill them all and let Jehovah sort them out, while I safely watch from the clouds with Jerry Falwell on one side and Jim Jones on the other.
God likes to watch.
We have already touched upon the apocalypse circus in past episodes of Aeon Byte, formerly known as Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis. Specifically my drivel on Aeon Byte number 41 with Gary Hudson, author of Revelation, Awakening the Christ Within. And we've dealt with the overlords of all doomsday Christian denominations, the Jehovah Witnesses, on Aeon Byte number 28 with Nate Merritt, author of Jehovah Unmasked.
Look, I had a lovely supper, and all I said to my wife was, that piece of halibut was good enough for Jehovah. Blasphemy! He said it again!
But I should repeat yet again that to the Gnostic the end of the world already happened, whether you want to take it metaphysically, mystically, or in a Jungian sense, psychologically. That is meaning you became fragmented, a ravaged microcosm, sometime in your youth when society cleaved into you with their cloning laws and regulations.
It's taken me all my life to find out who I am, and I am tired now. You hear what I'm saying?
Yes, my beloved true seekers, we are the jetsam and flotsam of the cosmic Titanic, floating to safety in the oceans of ignorance and perdition. The path of ascent is the same as the path of descent, the secret book of John tells us. We gotta get in to get out, Peter Gabriel sang in the Carpet Crawlers. As above, so below, said Hermes Trismegistos, speaking through Apollonius of Tyana. Whether it's the Luciferian fall of Sophian classic Gnosticism, the shattering of the vessels of the primal man in the Kabbalah, the pseudo-Narcissus collapse of the Logos in Hermeticism, or the destruction of the Man of Light in his battle against darkness in Manichaeanism, Armageddon already happened. And the only way to make matters right is to know this bleak little fact and return to the beginning of the end and understand why exactly it occurred. Then we can begin mending our inner and outer universes.
I was blind, now I can see!
Like I've quoted many times from the Gospel of Thomas, a central tenet to all of Gnosticism, the disciple said to Jesus, "Tell us, how will our end come?" Jesus said, "Have you found the beginning, then, that you are looking for the end? You see, the end will be where the beginning is. Congratulations to those who stand at the beginning. That one will know the end and will not taste death." Furthermore, the Gospel of Philip says, "The world came about through a mistake, for he who created it wanted to create it imperishable and immortal. He fell short of attaining his desire, for the world never was imperishable, nor, for that matter, was he who made the world. For things are not imperishable, but sons are. Nothing will be able to receive imperishability if it does not first become a son. But he who has not the ability to receive, how much more will he be unable to give?"
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
In other words, don't wait for the eschaton, because we're living in the ruins of the one and true apocalypse, the domain of the God of this world who has cast a grand illusion to make us all drunk, forgetful, and anxious all at the same time.
Prepare to taste God's wrath.
And the Gnostic texts, like the Origin of the World or the Gospel of Mary, speak of bringing existence back to its root, one spark at a time, one healing soul at a time, one dream at a time. If there's an actual end to the world, many Gnostic texts relate that it will be when the Archons lose their power over humanity. Simple as that. That is the Gnostic way, my beloved truth seekers. Knowing thyself means knowing something went wrong once upon a nightmare.
All I've ever known to be true is a lie.
Tragedy gave birth to the cosmic and personal ego. The Big Bang wasn't a great event, but a painful explosion of dark passions that created a predatory dungeon whose guards have an unquenchable thirst for all that is holy, all that belongs to the Pleroma. "Let there be light," said Jehovah, and we've been blinking achingly without truly being able to focus for so many eons.
That is when the world will end.
But not all is lost. In fact, the Gnostics, the Kabbalists, and other esoteric warlocks are part of that restoration plan the unknown father and mother devised when they experienced the notion of imperfection. All it takes is a little perspective, a little awareness, and a little compassion. And then Sophia will send her song to us, just as she herself cried to the Christ when she had fallen from the Pleroma. And our heroic destiny will become manifest through the painful reality of existence.
And what if you could go back in time and take all those hours of pain and darkness and replace them with something better?
Like the book of Proverbs says, "Wisdom crieth without, she uttereth her voice in the streets. She crieth in the chief place of concourse, in the openings of the gates. In the city she uttereth her words, saying, How long, ye simple ones, will ye love simplicity? And the scorners delight in their scorners, and the fools hate knowledge," or gnosis. But enough of my drivel. Let's see what mis-orthodoxy is made by thinking that the end of the world is a future event with our second interview with the very erudite Tim Callahan. Follow your bliss.
A man with your responsibilities reading about the end of the world. And what's this? I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
It is an ancient Hindu text, quoted by an American.
American?
He invented the atomic bomb, and he was later accused of being a communist.
Hear that, Mr. Anderson? That is the sound of inevitability. It is the sound of your death.
This is the Aeon Byte interview. Today we'll be having our second part of Secrets of the Bible, focusing more on Bible prophecy, failure or fulfillment, with our guest today, Tim Callahan. How you doing, Tim?
Really well.
Well, thank you very much for coming back for the second round. And why don't we get started? In the last show, we discussed how you became interested in the truth about the Bible and your journey thereafter. Did your curiosity in Bible prophecy stem from the same reasons or different ones? How did it happen?
It's sort of related. It's kind of an odd, convoluted tale. What happened was my wife had gotten involved with some very nice people in a prayer group where she worked at Hanna-Barbera. You know, they were very nice evangelical ladies, but they had all these rather troubling ideas. And she had been raised as a Catholic and had some unhappy results. And she left the church, but still had some baggage that hung on for years after. So that was kind of a background. And then in our local newspaper, the Pasadena Star-News, a creationist wrote in, and one of the nice things about the local paper is that when you write editorial letters, they usually get published, whereas, say, like the LA Times, you got maybe a 1 in 100 shot of getting your letters published, because there's such a wide area of people and so on. So anyway, he wrote this letter saying that Darwinian theory was an outmoded theory that scientists were abandoning in droves. And so I wrote a letter challenging him, and he wrote back, and we had this duel of letters going, and he challenged me on certain things, and I challenged him on various things. His was more on the Bible, and mine was more on biology. And then people joined in on both sides, and one lady wrote that of me and another letter writer that we were Bible-hating deophobics. I thought that was quite creative. And so anyway, I got curious, and I started listening to our local fundamentalist radio station, KKLA. And I was both fascinated and appalled at what I heard. I'd been trying to get some articles published at this time. I got a few published, a couple in the Humanist magazine about the so-called wise use movement, environmental stuff. Anyway, I got sort of incensed by some of the stuff that was being said on this station and started calling in and arguing with them. And one time, they had none other than Hal Lindsey on there. And I got him all upset because he was saying it was after the fall of the Soviet Union, and the whole rationale of Russia invading Israel pretty much was falling apart at that time. You know, and that was his initial step. Was Russia, for some unforeseeable reason, was going to invade the Middle East, particularly Israel, and then this would set in motion all of these various things that would bring about the end times. And so I said, in light of the fact that Russia wasn't the Soviet Union anymore, it is now, at least to some degree, a democratic state, didn't that change things? And he said, no, because, Russia is Magog, because the Russians are descendants of the Scythians, and they're the ones called Magog. And I corrected him, because the Russians, of course, are Slavic people. The Scythians were an Iranian-speaking people who were nomads on the Russian steppe. And he got quite incensed and told me I was from another planet and so on. So he, if I'd had my wits about me, I would have said, yes, Mr. Lindsay, I am from another planet. I'm from planet Earth. But you think of those things afterward.
Right.
So I wrote an article for Skeptic. I called Michael Shermer and asked about writing articles on creationism. And he said, no, we got a ton of articles on creationism. We don't need anything more on that. And so I said, well, how about this thing about prophecy? And I sent this thing in about Hal Lindsey. And he said, yeah, that's kind of interesting. And so he published that, and then they said, well, actually, I'd like you to write a book about it. And I wrote Bible Prophecy based on that. So that's how I got into the whole thing of investigating the prophecies of the Bible and so on.
And Tim, before we get into the meat of matters, why do you think fundamentalists are so obsessed with Bible prophecy, apocalyptical scripture, and just the whole end times carnage?
They have, a lot of cases, they have kind of a siege mentality, even though they aren't really the ones being besieged. In a lot of cases, there's the perception on part of many of them they're being besieged. And there's an odd compartmentalizing that goes on, that they'll listen to and lap up people saying that the world's the tribulation, the 7 years before the end of the world is going to start anytime soon. And yet, and these people be on a station like KKLA, and then most of the advertisers are advertisers for degree completion programs, living trusts, and the like, all of which are very long-term investments. So it's kind of an odd mix of stuff. They compartmentalize a lot. But I think also it gives a great deal of structure to the world. C.S. Lewis in the Screwtape Letters has Screwtape speak of the Christian church as spread out in time and in space, so like as terrible as an army with banners. And it gives you, like there's this great cosmic struggle. Things mean something. I remember going to a party. There was a woman there who was of that mindset, and was talking about, and she said, well, Satan tried to make me call in sick today, but I prayed to the Lord, and he strengthened me, and I made it to work. There were words to that effect. In other words, whether she went to work at her job, which was probably kind of a dead-end drudge job or not, was a matter of cosmic struggle. Satan and God were vying for her soul and her actions and everything, every aspect of her life. So that makes the world really have some importance to it. It has some structure, it has importance. It's a lot more appealing than if you don't believe that there's anything there specifically. There's no particular purpose for why we're here, or that you can discern at least, and your job is really a kind of a dead-end job, and it doesn't matter a whole lot except for your own personal responsibility, whether you go into work or call in sick. So I think it gives a structure. I think there's a certain degree of a siege mentality, and then there's that compartmentalization.
Tim, what exactly is the difference between prophecy and apocalypse?
Apocalypse comes from a Greek word, apocalyptos, which means a revealing, to draw back something. It's like drawing back a curtain. With the prophetic works of the Bible, they sometimes do have apocalyptic prophecies in them, are more oriented to their time and place. Books like Jeremiah and Isaiah and so on. Ezekiel, of course, has the famous Gog and Magog prophecy. So there's some apocalyptic work in there, but mostly it deals specifically with their day and age, whereas apocalyptic prophecies deal with the end of the world. So you can take the prophets, and there's about 3 different periods of prophets before we get to the apocalyptic time. Prophets of the period of the Assyrian Empire, when the Assyrian Empire was menacing Israel and Judah and eventually conquered Israel. It was roughly from 750 BCE to the fall of Nineveh to the Chaldeans and Medes in 612. That's the end of the Assyrian Empire. And, they generally foretold the destruction of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah at the hands of the Assyrians, or the divinely ordained destruction of the Assyrians themselves. And these prophets would include Amos, Micah, Hosea, and the first Isaiah, that is Isaiah chapters 1 through 39. The prophets of the period of Chaldean supremacy, which would be from 612 to 538 BCE, that's from the fall of Nineveh to the Chaldeans and Medes to the fall of Babylon and the end of the Chaldean Empire. This saw the destruction of Jerusalem in the 49-year Babylonian exile, and it dealt with the powers of that day, the Chaldean Empire, the Egyptian pharaoh Hophra, and the city-state of Tyre, and these prophets include Nahum, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Obadiah, and most especially Jeremiah and Ezekiel. So Ezekiel, as I said, has some of the events of his day couched in apocalyptic terms. Then there's prophets of the period of the Persian Empire from about 538 to 330 BC. They had less to worry about because things were mostly peaceful, but they did have often foretell about the reinstatement of the House of David in terms of the collapse of the Persian Empire. And these prophets would include the second and third Isaiah, Malachi, Haggai, Zechariah, and Joel. But those of the last two slide into apocalyptic prophecies. In the case of Zechariah, there's probably two authors to the book. Some of the prophecies you find in prose and some in poetic form, and the poetic ones tend to be more the apocalyptic. The only purely apocalyptic work that made it into the Jewish canon is the book of Daniel. Just about like all the other apocalyptic works, with the notable exception of the New Testament book of Revelation, which is ascribed to John of Patmos. Daniel is pseudepigraphic. They made up this character based on an ancient Canaanite sage. Pseudepigraphic means pseudo is false and epigraph is inscription, so false and inscribed or falsely ascribed to an ancient patriarch, or even in Daniel's case to a fictional character.
And isn't the book of Daniel not really based on, not based on Babylon and certainly not based on end times, but actually based on the Greek king, what was his name, Epiphanius?
Antiochus Epiphanes, yeah.
Yes.
Now, basically, what we have when you get to the apocalyptic books, see, I talked about the Persian period, the Assyrian period, the Chaldean period, the Persian period. Then, after the fall of the Persian Empire, you've got Alexander the Great's brief empire, and then it gets broken up by his generals. And one of those empires was the Seleucid Empire, Seleucid, I'm not sure how the pronunciation goes, but as it was declining and being pressured by the Parthian Empire on the east, it was a new Persian Empire, and the Romans in the west, they began to try to tighten controls over what they did have, and this along with the Hellenization of culture, provoked a reaction in Israel with a revolt, and this was caused by a king by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus IV. Epiphanes means made manifest, that he believed that he was earthly manifestation of God. And part of this kind of hubris pops up with the successors of the people called the Diadochian, people who succeeded Alexander. And Alexander set the course for that himself when he decided that he was the earthly manifestation of Zeus and Ammon. He had an epiphany when he was in Egypt. Anyway, getting back to this, though, the book of Daniel, book of Enoch, Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, the Assumption of Moses, and a bunch of others, all written from a period from about 160 BCE through, if we include Second Esdras, which is found in the Catholic Bible, CE 70. Mostly they were written in the middle of the 2nd century BCE. The Second Esdras was written in response to the destruction of Jerusalem in CE 70 by the Romans. And the New Testament Revelation was written about CE 90. And what the same is probably true, there's a number of other Christian apocalypses, Apocalypse of Peter and various others that didn't make it into the canon. But most of the other these things come from this Maccabean struggle against the Seleucid Empire. So that's when Daniel was written, and there's various clues as to that.
So, but the apocalyptical fever did not end with the leaving of the Greeks, and the people of the Jewish people were not happy with the Hasmoneans or the Romans right after that.
Well, the Hasmoneans started out being popular, but and they kept conquering territory. They kept adding to it, but there was a lot of division within the Jewish state, and one of the Hasmonean kings, Alexander Jannaeus, did some ritual wrong according to the way the Pharisees thought he should do it, or they didn't think he should be doing it, and they pelted him with fruit, and he got angry and ordered his soldiers to massacre a bunch of them. They crucified them, actually, and as they were being crucified, his soldiers raped their wives under their, while they were dying. So it was pretty brutal there, and
wow.
Then, of course, the Romans intervened in a power struggle between two of the claimants for the throne among the Maccabees, and they championed the weaker of the two, which is their way of getting a thin entering wedge, and eventually, of course, they invaded and controlled. Now the Romans took the place of the Greeks.
So needless to say, the Jewish people, this was just ripe terrain for the whole Messiah movement to come to fruition. So moving on to the New Testament just for a while, what are, obviously, as we mentioned in last show, there was lots of messiahs running around and claiming this and performing miracles and so forth. But, and Jesus came the winner afterwards, and Christianity was born. But obviously there are some problems, as you point out in both of your books. What are some of the Old Testament prophecies assumed to legitimize the Messianic pedigree of Jesus that are not true? I guess we can start with the suffering servant.
That's one. The suffering servant actually referred to the Jewish people as the suffering servant. And then there's also the Emmanuel prophecy of Isaiah 7, verses 8 through 16 comes to mind. Of course, the prophecy in Micah 5:2 that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. And although both Luke and Matthew claim that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, they have widely different stories, and they all have to go through this rather convoluted story of why he really was born in Bethlehem, but he really did come from Galilee. So that probably is another false prophecy. Also, the gospel writers, particularly Matthew, just ransacked the Old Testament which was to them the Hebrew Scriptures, for prophecies. And they even used various psalms, which weren't meant to be prophetic, as prophecies.
They were basically literally devices that they use, right?
Yeah, and Matthew just pulls all the stops out for his version of the Nativity, utterly ignoring the original context of the process. For example, Isaiah 7, 8 through 16, the Emmanuel prophecy, obviously refers to Isaiah's time during the reign of the Syrian king Tiglath-Pileser III. That's 745 to 727 BCE. It even says that this will happen, but before this child is old enough to tell good from evil, the nations that you live in dread of will have ceased to be. So it's talking about back in that time. So let me do Matthew 2. Matthew 2, 17 and 18. We've got Matthew 2, 17 and 18. Let's see. Then it was fulfilled what was spoken of by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing with loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they were no more. And that refers, that's 17, 18, that refers to the massacre of the innocents by Herod, supposedly. If we actually look at Jeremiah's words, we find that Rachel weeping for her children is Jeremiah 40, verse 1, if I can find it here. Sorry, not 40, verse 1, it's 39, 1. Well, anyway, what Jeremiah says is that Rachel weeping for her children deals with the captivity of the tribe of Ephraim and by the Assyrians. And it says, here it says, thus says the Lord, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children and refuses to be comforted for her children because they are not. It says, thus says the Lord, keep your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for your work will be rewarded, says the Lord. They shall come back from the land of the enemy. So it refers to a period of captivity. It doesn't refer to Herod massacring the innocents. Those are just a few of the failed prophecies or prophecies shoehorned by Matthew and other gospel writers.
Another one you used, Tim, is Judas and the 30 pieces of gold.
Basically, it's another thing where they've shoehorned things. That 30 pieces of gold was the price you paid to redeem a slave, and so it was. The whole thing is also. Jeremiah says to take it and throw it into the treasury and so on, and to be used to buy a potter's field. And so it's been really worked out over to get it into the gospel. And there's also, of course, the differences between the Jewish Bible and the Christian as far as the language is spoken.
Yeah, I think one example you use, I don't know exactly, it's in one of the Psalms, I don't know if it's 22, but it refers to somebody having their feet pierced, but in the Jewish Bible it doesn't say that, right?
Oh yeah, it actually says it says they dig into my hands and feet, and there's and they got it translated into the New Testament as a word meaning pierced. I think it's in Gedzo as the word in the Greek, and the word in the original Hebrew word, I don't recall it right at the moment, but it is a word to dig, and they had a specific word for pierce that was quite different, which is used in Zechariah, for example. But one of the ones I'm thinking about also has to do with the virgin birth, that the way the Bible is translated in English, Isaiah 7, that the Emmanuel prophecy says, if you look at a King James Bible, for example, says, a virgin will give birth and bear a child. And you go back to the original Hebrew, and the word that is used as translated as virgin is Alma, A-L-M-A-H in our alphabet, which means a young woman. It could be, could be a virgin, it could just be a young woman. And they did have a very specific word, Bethula, B-E-T-H-U-L-A, that meant specifically virgin. Unfortunately, in Greek, they've got one word, Parthenos, that sort of covers both. And so because Parthenos was used, it could be stretched to be virgin birth, and therefore they could again shoehorn Isaiah's prophecy to be about Jesus.
And Tim, I guess this begs the question, why did all the Bible authors, including Paul, base themselves on the Septuagint instead of the Jewish Bible?
You have to remember that the people who wrote the New Testament wrote in Greek. The New Testament was originally written in Koine Greek, that is the Greek that was the common everyday speech of the Eastern Mediterranean world in Hellenistic and Roman times. And so we're talking about people who, for the most part, are culturally Greek, really. Or if they were Jewish, they were probably diaspora Jews. Even the diaspora Jews, the reason for the Septuagint was that a lot of Jews had emigrated out of Israel, had adopted Greek culture, and only spoke Greek. And their Greek impact on Judaism was quite profound. For example, consider the word synagogue. It's actually a Greek word. Synagoge means an assembly. And so, or consider some common names among males, both just Jewish names and names of some of the followers of Jesus. One of the apostles' name or disciples' name was Andrew. It's Andreas, means Greek for manly. Look at Philip, common Jewish name, and Alexander, again both Greek names, from Philip of Macedon, means lover of horses, and Alexander, helper of men, and obviously Alexander the Great. So there was so these people were culturally more Greek than they were Jewish, so they naturally used their scripture was the Hebrew scriptures translated into Greek, the Septuagint.
Tim, the most popular book for end-timers is certainly the Revelation of John or the Apocalypse of John. What is the truth about its origins and message?
Probably written around the year 90. When it refers to Babylon, it's speaking of Rome. It talks about Babylon being a city resting on 7 hills. That's, of course, Rome. The beast, who has a number 666, if you go into the numerology of that, it translates in Greek, Neron Caesar, that's Nero, and if you use Nero Caesar instead of Neron Caesar, you get 626, which is, or 616, I forget which exactly it was, but in some translations of Revelation, that's in the Greek translations, it is 616 is the number of the beast. So it undoubtedly refers to Nero. There was at the time of a popular legend called the Nero Redivivus legend. There was this belief that Nero was going to rise from the dead and come back with an army from the east of the Parthians. And the Romans just dreaded the Parthians way out of proportion, because the Parthians had a lot more to worry about from the Romans than the Romans did from them. But anyway, so there was this kind of urban legend going around that Nero was going to rise from the dead and come back and wreak havoc. And so this buys into that. And it says right at the beginning, the very first verse of Revelation tells you that it's for that time and place. It says, John 1:1, or Revelation 1:1, Revelation of John of Patmos, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his servants what must soon take place. In other words, and for his generation. And also, you read in the Pauline epistles, Paul says, we will not all die, fall asleep. The word is koimeo in Greek, which means either sleep or die. We will not all sleep before the end, and the trumpet will sound, and so on, and people will rise from the dead. And then Jesus said, there are some standing here today who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in with the power of the holy angels. So Jesus, in a number of places, says that this is going to happen in this generation, and Paul also, and John is the same way in Revelation. The original Christian church was something of a doomsday cult.
So basically, Revelation is simply the trials and tribulations of the early church against Roman oppression.
More or less, yeah. And particularly, it was the author. It's noted by students of the Greek, original Greek New Testament, the original to the degree we have the original, that the Greek used in, for example, John was a very common name, by the way, just as it is today. Yohanan means gift of Yahweh. The John who wrote the Gospel of John, or if that was actually his name, uses very polished Greek in comparison to some of the other Greek used. And the people have noted who study this that the Greek of the book of Revelation is sometimes kind of crude, and they believe that it's quite possible that John of Patmos was a refugee from Jerusalem when it fell, and that he was harboring all this terrible baggage and ill will from seeing the destruction of his country, so that he wrote in Greek because he had to, so he had both the Christian tribulations with the Romans and that of the Jews.
And Tim, what exactly is dispensationalism?
Dispensationalism.
Thank you. I'm having a problem with that. And how does it benefit fundamentalists?
It was an idea that came up with in the 19th century that God dispensed certain covenants to the human race. It's kind of a pessimistic history. It generally is premillennial dispensationalism, is what is referred to. That is, that the millennium, the 1,000-year reign of Jesus, will come after all the terrible things of Revelation. That Revelation comes first, and then you get the millennium. So you have to go through all this horrible stuff. But anyway, the dispensations were as follows: God dispensed a covenant. Human beings screwed up. There was a catastrophic something or other that happened, and then God would dispense a new one, and so on. So they are organized different ways, but basically you could take about 7 dispensations. The first one being the Garden of Eden, which is ended by the fall of man. Then there's the antediluvian world, where the people have really long lifespans, and that's ended by the deluge of Noah's deluge. And then there's a post-flood civilization where everybody speaks the same language, which is ended by the destruction of the Tower of Babel because of the people's pride. Then you've got the Abrahamic covenant, another dispensation, which is ended by the Babylonian captivity. You might have another one, be the post-exilic renewal of the covenant, which is ended at the first coming of Christ. And then you've got the church age, which will be ended by the second coming of Christ. And then the final dispensation would be the millennial kingdom, lasting 1,000 years, which will be ended by the last judgment when Satan's let loose one last time, and so on and so forth. So that's the doctrine of dispensationalism in a nutshell. It sees history as these divine dispensations.
And Tim, what is the doctrine of the rapture, and what are some of the gaping holes do you see in it?
Well, I told you the dispensationalism thing, and it's premillennial. So selling this thing to people is, you would think, might be kind of difficult. They would prefer to believe in something not so horrible if they,
right.
And yet they kind of revel in this thing that all this terrible stuff is going to happen. But the rapture is the fundamentalist escape clause. It was come up. It was somebody, I can't remember the fellow who came up with it. It was in the 1700s, I believe, late 1700s, a Scottish clergyman. And it's based on a couple of odd little pieces out of the Bible in the Little Apocalypse, also called the Olivet Discourse, that's in all the Synoptic Gospels. There's a kind of cryptic phrase, two men are working in the field, one is taken as one is not. Two women are grinding at the mill, one is taken and one is not. And it's kind of hard to figure that out. Then Paul says, I think it's in St. Thessalonians, I'm not absolutely sure of that, says we will not all die, but those who are dead in Christ will rise, and then we will all rise to meet Jesus in the air. And so the idea is that they would actually physically rise. They would be raptured. That is to say, that comes from the Latin word rapare, which means to seize or snatch away, which our word raptor for bird of prey comes from. Also the word rape, and of course the word rapture. You're sort of seized. You're drawn on it. You're snatched away and state of ecstasy. So the rapture is that just before all these end time things going to happen, the faithful are going to suddenly rise into the air, and if you are unlucky enough to be an unbeliever on an airplane piloted by an evangelical, you're suddenly going to be in an airplane without a pilot, or there'll be auto wrecks, and they've got all these great lurid pictures showing these kind of ghostly things rising and people rising in the air, and cars smashing into things and airplanes falling out of the sky. And so all of the good folks will be out, and so they don't have to go through all of these horrible things of the end times.
And this is all based on basically two passages or two ideas of the whole
Two or
Bible.
three passages. Let me see. I've got, let me see here. I've actually got something about that. The rapture. Let me see if I can find the actual time. Paul's description of the rapture is 1 Thessalonians. Then there's also let's see, Matthew 24:8, I believe it is. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry, Matthew 24. Matthew 24:40 through 41 says two men working in a field, or two women grinding in a mill, and one is taken and one is left. And this is all cobbled together out of these different things, taking these disparate parts and putting it together a very late doctrine.
What are some of the more popular end-time prophecy scenarios in our modern days that have obviously not materialized? I assume the Cold War was one of them, right?
Yeah, well, of course, Hal Lindsey, in his Late Day of Planet Earth, said that they had this fixation that this generation will not pass away before these things come to pass. That's what Jesus says, and that actually means his generation. But they've worked around to the generation. The word generation, genos, actually means genea, meaning people. And it means that it's, or maybe that's the other way around, but they've confused the two, and it means that the state of Israel will not pass away, this generation of the state of Israel. So Israel was founded in 1948, and a certain convention means a generation is 40 years. I'm not quite sure how they arrived at that round number, but so 40 years after the founding of the State of Israel, the end times were supposed to begin, the tribulation, and it wouldn't be a period of 7 years, and then that would have been it. So that would have been 1988. And as that year approached and it wasn't happening, Hal Lindsey began hedging his bets and saying, well, it might be that a generation actually is 100 years, because there's two different sources talking about how long people will be in Egypt. One says they'll be in there for 400 years, another one says they'll be there for 4 generations. And so Hal put those together to get a generation equaling 100 years. So that meant that it wouldn't be 1948, it would be then 2048. Or he said that the founding of Israel wasn't complete until they took the old city of Jerusalem in the Six-Day War in 1967. So then that gives you another fallback thing. 67 plus 40 would have been 2007. Of course, that's gone. But then you could say, it's 100 years after the taking of the old city of Jerusalem in the Six-Day War, so it's 2067. And of course, by the time all these are done, Hal Lindsey will be dead and have died a rich man.
Yes, indeed.
And that's one of many. And of course, in history, there were a number of these. The Millerites come to mind. In the 1840s, they believed that the world was going to end because of some obscure calculations that the founder did, Miller, and they became eventually the Seventh-day Adventists, and they came back from what they called the Great Disappointment, because people sold their farms and they gathered on hilltops to wait to be raptured out of there, and nothing happened, and so they had to refigure that. Then there's an interesting book that I found in the Fuller Theological Seminary's McAllister Library. I live in the Pasadena area, as you probably guessed from mentioning the Pasadena Star News. And the Fuller Theological Seminary has a wonderful, spectacular library and has books of, very scholarly books, and they got some really far-out books on the other side. And they've gone from being very evangelical to being very liberal and back again. And each time they go one way or another, they get books from that group, and they never lose them. So they got this fantastic library that spreads out. And I found in the course of my researches a book titled Louis Napoleon. It's written in 1866. It said, Louis Napoleon. The subtitle was, Is he to be the ruler of the 10 nations and the Antichrist? He was a candidate for the Antichrist. Do you know who Louis Napoleon was?
No.
The funny thing, Louis Napoleon was a nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, and he got himself elected president in the kind of turbulent later part of the 19th century, president of France and the Republic. I think it was the Second Republic was there, and he managed, saw it was so weak as a republic and so unstable that he managed to declare himself emperor as Napoleon III. And it was believed, a lot of people believed that he was going to be another Napoleon. And so his fate was rather ignominious, though. He got lured into the Franco-Prussian War by Bismarck, Otto von Bismarck, and the French were utterly defeated. His government fell, and that set up the Third Republic. So he came out to be a real cropper and a nobody. But there was actually such speculation. The author of this book didn't agree that Louis Napoleon was going to be the Antichrist, but he had to write a 400-plus page book to refute the idea. Wow. So it lets you know that there are enough stresses in any time where it just seems like this awful thing's going to happen. And certainly, we lived through a really great one. The prospect of nuclear war certainly made the idea of the end of the world quite realistic. So, but they have a way of not panning out.
But isn't one of the main essential facts of end-time prophecy that the third temple be built? How do they get around that? Do they simply say, it's going to be built soon?
They keep coming up with things that this is going to happen. There's the third temple built. In the early history of Islam, there were some battles between various factions, and one faction got control of Mecca, and so the faction that was out of power temporarily decided that the holiest city would be the next holiest city after Mecca, which was Jerusalem. And they built a mosque there, the Dome of the Rock, and at the side of the Temple Mount. And they later recaptured, Mecca, but so that's second only to Mecca is the Dome of the Rock. So there's this big problem: is that if you try to rebuild the temple, it's on the site of that. You may have to destroy the Dome of the Rock, or you build it next to it, and this would be an affront to the Muslims. And there is within Israel a group that advocates Eretz Yisrael, which means Greater Israel. They want to extend the border of Israel to the Euphrates, and basically essentially take over Syria and a whole bunch of other things, and build the temple, and find the red heifer and all this stuff. And there's always these things blowing in the wind that they found the perfect red heifer. They found this, and they're about to do that. As part of it merges with modern day conspiracy theories. There are people who would like to do that. I think most of Judaism is pretty well reconciled to there not being a temple. Actually, what we know of as Judaism, the rabbinical Judaism, grew out of the destruction of the temple. While the temple was there were, along with the Pharisees, who were the source of the rabbinical Jews, there were the Sadducees, who basically thought that as long as you did everything just so, God was in his heaven and all was right in the world. As you had the sacrifices on a certain day, and you selected them a certain way, you sacrificed the perfect red heifer, you drained the blood out this way, this is the way we wash our socks and all that stuff. And they were largely lost with the destruction of the temple. So modern rabbinical Judaism, that is modern since the fall of the destruction of Jerusalem in the year 70, has been a Judaism that by its nature is without the temple. It became more into how you live your life and debates about what the proper thing is, how ethics and such things, more than this kind of cult. So I'm sure most Jews don't really care about it. There are a few things, and I think that Christians are much more interested in rebuilding the temple than most Jews are.
Since your book came out a while ago, have you heard of some of the newer end-time prophecies? I mean, who's the next villain? Is it Islam these days? China? What do you see?
Well, I haven't followed it since I wrote my book because it seemed irrelevant to me, but I know one of the big things of the developed Left Behind books, the same scenario seems to get played out a lot. I mean, Hal Lindsey, if he wanted to resurrect he probably is retired now, but if he wanted to resurrect it, he could bend things around to fit it. And you have got to remember that in his scenario, Russia invades Israel in league with Islamic states, so that would bring Islam into it. And then the huge army, the 200 million strong army that comes from the east, which actually in the original thing that had to do with the Parthians, is now the Red Chinese, and that was in Hal Lindsey's thing. So he's got a place for them. They can adapt anything to fit. Give you an idea of how adaptable things are. The Gog and Magog prophecies, supposedly Gog and Magog refers to Russia. When the reconquest of Spain was taking place, the Christian reconquest after the Muslims had conquered it, they said that they were fulfilling the prophecy that they were Gog and Magog, since they were descendants of the Visigoths. They were the nations of the north, and they're taking Spain away from the Semitic peoples, and was a fulfillment of the Gog and Magog prophecy. So that's how far things can be stretched.
And one thing which I thought was very interesting in your book you point out is in all these end-time scenarios, the United States is conspicuously absent, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's, of course, the reason is that it's very difficult to fit it in there because they weren't referring to it. They had no concept of it being there. some people have tried to make the lions of Tarshish, that colony of in the probably a Phoenician colony in Spain, to stretch that to be the New World, and but they're usually they say, well, what's going to happen is that we're just going to fall behind, and the 10-nation league of the common market, which I think is up to 15 now, is going to, and they'll say, well, 5 of them will quit, or whatever it is, that, or as 10 nations are among them, there's at least 10 nations among them. They can stretch it anyway. That we'll fall behind. It will just be sort of like a satellite of the common market, and so any fears, if the dollar falls against the euro, that's confirmation that we're going to be a satellite to the European common market, and which is the the empire of the beast.
Right. Well, the wheel keeps on turning. Well, Tim, I think that's about all the time we have today. Thank you very much for coming on and for our second part and discussing your excellent book, Bible Prophecy.
Well, thank you. Appreciate you having me.
The pleasure's all mine. Well, you have a good day now, and thank you again.
Thank you.